Okay, in this quick tip video we're going to talk about creating some complex sand fields. Stuff like this where we get a variety of different sort of areas that look like maybe somebody's been walking through it and other that have been wind blown, just to give that really detailed look. Now we can also add debris to it, which we'll add at the end just to see how that works as well. The starting point, of course, is using a Voronoi. Regular Voronoi here. The default settings for the most part, outside of the fact that I made it dual and I changed the scale through both of these and this in order to make it much smaller. My ultimate goal is to create additional complexity by then combining things like landform and the fold together to give me something that I can contrast against. So by then combining these two using a difference, I add another layer of complexity that wouldn't regularly be there. Taking that through a constant to control the height makes it pretty convenient. And now you can see what's happened here. I've got, some of the main Voronoi pattern that's there still, but it's added another layer of these tiny little bits all throughout it. Now one of the easy things that you can do to that is going through the snow node. Snow goes ahead and fills in a lot of the areas and softens a lot of the different regions, allowing certain peaks to sit out from there. You can use this in a variety of ways to give you that sense of, sand-covered or snow-covered surfaces. Another way that we can deal with this is just using Voronoi alone. Here I've taken down the warp amplitude using the default settings and again altering the scale to make it smaller by applying a blur of moderate level, not level 2 but 2, just 1, and then applying aperture, you get an interesting sort of sand-like pattern present right there. If I take those two different elements and combine them together, I get something interesting. A little layer of complexity all kind of worked in. Another way that I can work off this is by using the recurve node. Recurve has an inflate mode, which creates mounds, and it has a carving method, which carves into the surface. As you can see, we've got a fairly detailed sort of sandy collection. And one of the things I did in order to encourage these to be a little bit stronger is by taking down the scale. At these smaller sizes, it'll carve a little bit more strongly. You take it up, it'll carve a little bit lightly. So you can play with the scale on that in order to adjust how much it does. Once you find a good balance, it's good from the first one to then just copy and paste it so you can share the same values. Now this was a good little bit of detail, and by itself it's pretty interesting, but I wanted to soften it a little bit to get rid of some of those details, some of the really fine stuff, and then an aperture to then smooth it back in, and so we get a nice pattern from that as well. So both of those are valid ways of creating detailed versions of sand. By taking that and combining it with this, we get another layer of complexity in here. The key difference with this is that I took a purlin and I've set it to billowy. The only artifacts that are a problem for me are these internal sort of carved regions that I want to soften out. So applying a fairly strong blur eliminates those, and then sending it through an auto level ensures that I get those minimum and maximum regions. So you can see it's added it to some areas and not to others. So that adds to that complexity. The other advantage to using this method, say versus something like a displaced node, is you don't have to worry about the excess complexity, but you also don't get any warping that would happen from those. What you have is some smaller scale sections with some larger scale sections blending evenly one into the other, which is a nicer kind of fit to that. So to get the rock features, we're going back to this complex pattern that's been created by just taking this, roughing it up, and then subtracting it from itself. And I take the bias gain. I've adjusted the bias to lower them a little bit, but also the intensity to drop it down so some of the sections just disappear below the plane. In order to completely eliminate those things below the plane, I send them through a clip node, just clipping them off. So anything that's gone is completely gone forever. Then by pumping it through a constant, which is a nice easy way of controlling the height without any other complications, I get them down to a lower level. Then combining them here with the setting set to max allows them to peek through, and I can control how much of those rocks to show and how little by playing with things like the bias gain as well as the height, how much kind of peeks through. If I increase the value, more of them show up and I get those bigger bits of talus. Of course, if I lower them, I get less. So hopefully this has given you some ideas of how you can work with this, different forms of existing sand on top of the existing Dune node that is in here. And in the Dune node, of course, you have the two different patterns that are present, one being the Dune C, and playing with the scale of that will just stretch it, and the strength will increase the deformation that happens here, versus the chaotic. And the chaotic, of course, is what the default older Dune node did. You get these more chaotic Dune patterns, which again can be softened by doing something like applying a blur and aperture in order to control that a little bit if you don't really like the form. Adding other layers of complexity, such as the methods that we've seen in here, can also help you produce some pretty interesting sand-like structures. So as always, I hope this has been useful to you. You got some ideas, and I'll see you in the next video.